Imagine that you are a leprechaun traveling around a world. You have a background as a trap specialist, so you can lay traps for your enemies as they come. And in this world, you have uncovered an ancient fortress that you can raid to claim treasures. There are bandits who are invading a city. There is a wise monk in the hills, and if you find her, she will teach you her ancient ways. There are some halflings who are hidden in an iron mine and need your help. You're alone, but you could be traveling with a gremlin, for example, who are rotten and mischievous and every now and then will double in size and go on a rampage. And this gremlin that you're traveling with could be trained as an apothecary. So while you're traveling, he could be brewing potions like troll's blood and mystic tonics that will heal you and give you energy. All of these fantastic things are what this game promises, and to some extent, all of these fantastic things and more can happen in this game. This is a game that has at its heart an attempt to be an RPG open world experience in a box, and I will talk about a little bit how it attempts to do this and what that means in terms of actually playing this type of game as a board game. We're looking here at part of the world setup. There are modular tiles, 4 of them that you start with, that basic game tiles here that you can put together in any combination you want to travel through the world. And during the course of the game, you will be pulling from this stack of additional tiles that are all lettered, and the letters will correspond to various quests that you will also pull in during the course of the game. So for example, this quest will not be available to you to do until you get tile E. You start out with just tiles A, B, C, and D. E could be anywhere in this stack. The picture here will tell you where to locate the quest that once you pull out the tile, you put a quest token down to note that this is where you're going to complete that quest, and then the quest itself will become available, and it will explain to you what has to happen and what possible rewards there are, or additional rewards there are. So for example, there's a lot of flavor text on the quests, and you are certainly meant to be reading them and thinking about them, I think, as narrative elements, even if ultimately it boils down to a roll of a die. So for example, here is a dual quest, and it will tell you up in the left-hand corner, there'll be a picture of 2 d10s that are color-coded. Every character is rolling 3 d10s of different colors that correspond to different actions and things. And you'll read here, in this duel long ago, this smoldering cavern was a dwarven prison that once housed their race's greatest enemies and criminals, etc. Explore the cavern and see if you can locate the gemstone. What this boils down to is the word explore. So the quests are categorized, and that explore is one of your basic skills, and what that means is you would need to be rolling the relevant d10 and obtaining a value that is equal to or less than your skill level in that activity to be successful in the quest. Well, what are your skills? This is what perhaps makes this game unique and is both, I think, its greatest strength and perhaps its greatest weakness. Here's an example of the skill card of the trap specialist. Everybody comes with built-in skills, and they are very thematic. So the trap specialist, as you would expect, is somebody who can set traps, and there's an explanation here of the masteries. They're called first and second masteries. That are the skills that are differentiated from other characters, and how they work and how they can be built up and what energy they cost to complete. Each character has both a health value and an energy value. Everybody has an offensive value and a defensive value in addition to their 2 skills, and then they have these other well, excuse me, I'm calling these wrong. These are abilities and these are skills. So your specific ability is offense, defense, and your specialties. And then everybody has baseline skills of navigation with a green die exploration, and survival. So in the case that we just saw with that quest, you're basically rolling against these numbers here. This is a poorly executed 5 to determine how successful you will be. And you can see, for example, the survival of the trap specialist, this blue die, is only at a 2. So for him to succeed on any quest that involves a survival die, he must roll only a 1 or a 2 on a d10. So he's not that great or built up yet in that area. Whereas on exploration, any quest or any activity that involves exploration, he has a much better chance because he's up to a 5 there, and his navigation is at a 3. These values, which are written on this card with a dry erase marker and will be changing throughout the game, are key to the flexible nature, or the attempt at the, well, I won't say attempt because it is successful, the flexible nature of the game. The values do change. Certainly your health and your energy changes, but even of course your items will be changing, and your specialty values will be changing because they are a very basic mathematical calculation based on some other values that can also change. So for example, the specialty trap value, it's a combination of your specialty trap baseline value and your triggered assault value. So in this case, it is an 8 to do a specialty trap, but as these might change, this will change. So you're going to need to be erasing these values. How can these change? Well, there are a number of ways, but you can purchase upgrades to them. And if you look closely here around the hexagon, you can see there are numbers here, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Each number is the amount of gold it costs to raise this value by 1. So if your value currently is at a 4 and you wanted to get it to a 5 through purchasing as opposed to other means, you would need to spend 4 gold. There is a place here, this character currently, the leprechaun, has no gold right now, but the gold value is another thing that will be changing in here. Additionally, you do need to carry and consume food, and there is a spot here for indicating how much food you have, how much you're consuming, and everything regarding that. And of course, you will be carrying things in a backpack. This particular character has some luck stones, which are very important in the game. You simply must have them because these will allow you to change some of the circumstances in the game that you may encounter that you just may be incapable of dealing with depending on when you encounter them in the game. He's got some potions, and those are healing potions, and some rations for eating, some climbing gear for dealing with mountainous hexes. If you don't have the climbing gear, you can't get into a mountainous hex. And he has a name. I've called him Impy. This is the leprechaun trap specialist, and everybody has a favorite opponent, and in this case, the leprechaun's favorite opponent are those that are considered magical nature in some way, and this will allow him to do damage, additional damage that cannot be deflected by defense. There are an astonishing variety of races that you can be in this game, and this is the leprechaun that I was talking about. So we'll just look at this to show the basic setup. You are given, there's, as mentioned, the magical nature is the favorite opponent here. And we have a food rating, which is how much food you need to consume each turn if you are not successful on a survival roll. And some basic stats that you get, the vitals, the abilities, and the skills. This will tell you what you get to add to what you'll pick up from your class card. And there are also an astonishing number of different classes you can choose from. Here's the stack of them, and we'll look at some of them here. This is actually one of the more interesting and complicated ones, the summoner, because what it allows you to do with your mastery skills is to bring in other characters or other beasts, summon them to act on your behalf for a certain number of turns. And so that is what the special skills of the summoner are. And you can see here that it is considered a striker within there are different role characterizations, and this is a striker role. There are beast masters here, and this will allow you to also summon certain types of animals. There's a magical class, there's a sorcerer, for example, and the mastery of the sorcerer is to deal additional energy and health damage out to opponents. There are also healer roles, so the Divine One will have an additional ability to recover for itself and its party. And in a different way, the Shaman is going to be able to create certain healing talismans, or totems they call them, to be consumed at a later date, also to heal a party. There is a weaponsmith who can increase the attack ability of an ally by making weapons on the fly, basically. And one of my favorite ones is the apothecary, who can create potion smithing, who can create potions along the way, as mentioned earlier, to aid in healing and in energy management. Again, these are coupled with, I sort of moved away from the race cards here. A leprechaun, you can play a gremlin. That was already mentioned in terms of the special ability. Everybody has a special ability. So the pixie, for example, as you would expect, they're diminutive and inquisitive creatures. Once per combat, for a certain amount of energy, they can be untargetable. They only consume one food. There's a shade who has the favorite opponent of the undead, consumes more food, and they can reflect attacks once per combat. They can reflect attacks that are made against them. And again, everybody is contributing a certain amount. So if you had, for example, a shade priest, you could do any combination you wanted to. The baseline value of, for example, the offensive attack would be whatever you got from being the priest plus 1. There's a dryad. Gnomes, of course. You could play a young gold dragon if you wanted to, but again, choosing this character, you need to look and see the food rating of 4 is very high. You don't start out with a lot of food, and it goes pretty quickly, especially if your survival value is not that high and you're not successfully rolling. You can be a minotaur, an elf, an orc. So many, 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 many different types of characters that can be combined here. I think the back of the box maintains that there are 700 different combinations. That seems perfectly plausible because there are no restrictions on what you can be. And the no restrictions part actually is something to pay attention to, because there are certain character combinations that become extremely powerful, such as there is a, I can't remember what it's called, but there is a racial characteristic on somebody that basically lets you look ahead in certain card draws, and there's the same thing with one of the roles. So if you combine those two together, which may be necessary to do playing solo, and we'll get to that, but if you combine those two together, that becomes extremely powerful in terms of foreseeing what may happen to you. And what is going to happen to you during the course of the game we talked about is there are quests that need to be fulfilled, and then there are also circumstances that come into play during the course of the game. And these are effects that can happen. Now, some of them are encounters. So for example, you may roll on, there are 5 of these out at any time, and you're rolling a d6 and choosing either one of the 5 that are out or one from the deck. You may encounter, for example, something like these marauders and need to fight them if you can't escape. Or you could encounter something that is like an affliction to your party. If you drew this affliction to your party, what it means is that after every round of combat, you have to roll a dice, and that the person who gets the highest roll is going to lose all action for the next round. Now, this is actually a good one. I randomly pulled this, but it's a good one to discuss from the perspective of solo play, because there are definitely some cards, and this is one of them, that don't really work well with solo play, because if you're the only person in your party and then you have no actions, you're basically out of it. There are also, I think, issues of scalability in solo play, and this is a nice segue to talking about that. Because with all of this stuff that you're getting, you are fighting those individual encounters, but you're also encountering a bunch of bosses and boss monsters, I guess they're called, and ultimately the Dead King. And I will say one thing also about this, unless I am, here's the Dead King. We'll just get right to the big guy first. But Unless I'm missing it in the rulebook, and that's very possible, but it's also possible it's not specifically in the rulebook. Um, Nowhere is it explicitly stated that to win this game you need to defeat the dead king. I mean, obviously you do, but I really didn't actually see that explicitly stated here in any or there. In any event, this is the dead king card, and as mentioned, there are 10 bosses. He is level 10. He's the highest one. He's got a health of 140, that's right, and an energy level of 120. Energy is used to power these skills that have this little symbol here. So when the energy is gone, you're not gone, but your ability to use those skills is gone. And the same thing is true for your basic character. So these mastery skills require energy. Now, just seeing this health of 140, you can see this is a very, very powerful character. Your goal is to power up along the way by doing quests and having encounters, and some of them will produce gold for you and some of them will produce power-ups. There is the power-up deck here, and if you complete an encounter successfully or a quest successfully and turn it into a city, you will get the benefits. If the benefit is a power-up, for example, you're getting an increase of 2 to these 2 values for your first and second mastery. So that actually is very, very significant, because as we could see in the example I showed you earlier, that these numbers will be drawn together to determine how powerful whatever that mastery is. And so there are a range of, well, those look the same, but there are a range of different benefits that you can get. This is a +1 to all your baseline skills, your exploration, your navigation, and your survival. The Dead King does not start the game on the board. This is the Dead King. He is coming into the game in any number of the first 6 turns. You're basically rolling per the rules. You're rolling a d6, and for the first turn he's coming in on a 6. And if you don't roll a 6, he doesn't come in. Second time you go through, he comes in on a 5 or 6, 4, 5 or 6, etc. So he will come in by the time you get to turn 6, and once he is on the board, he starts destroying cities and following you around. Well, ultimately he starts going from city to city and then following you around once all the cities are destroyed. The significance of the destruction of the cities is that when the cities are destroyed, and here is the example, here's one city. When the city is destroyed, you cannot turn in your quests that you have completed, and if you can't turn in your quests, you can't get any of the benefits. You also can't go to the market that is located in the cities and buy things like additional skills or healing potions or anything that is available in a city. And you absolutely need those things in order to have any hope in the game. Now, as mentioned, there are bosses, and here's boss level 1. This is the Bandit Prince, and I'll just show you this to give you an example of the range of difficulty. So the Bandit Prince here, we haven't even looked at the special skills, but he's got a health of 25 and an energy level of 6, and of 16, and these are his special fight, attack, defense masteries, and the way you determine what he will be using is to roll a d6 during combat. These bosses come out randomly. They come out as a result of cards that are drawn during the course of the games. They are going to be located on these hex tiles that you draw to add to your basic setup of the 4 starting tiles. So they're not going to come out immediately unless you start drawing these cards in, which it's not a good idea to do. You need to explore around and hopefully complete some quests before that happens. However, at a certain point they will start coming out, and they don't come out in this order. They could come out in any order, really. And so you could be facing, say, a level 8 boss could be an option for you. It would be a foolhardy option to take, but it is possible to have that cluttering up your quest line where there's only 5 available quests, and this is the importance of the luck stone that I mentioned. The luck stone will allow you to discard some quests that you have not done or circumstances that you have not played in the game, and it is pretty much a must a must purchase, because if you can't do that, you could potentially end up with a series of quests and encounters that it's just practically mathematically impossible to deal with. I'm showing you here the general market and what is available to buy at any city you may encounter. There are food rations, there's health and energy rations, this luckstone that we mentioned, some healing elixirs, camping gear, maps, climbing gear, there's a boat. Mounts are pretty important to increase your ability to travel. And I've never done this, but this is pretty cool actually. You can build your own little fortification, and this can serve as a base of operations for you to go back to and heal and rest and things of that nature. I think that in thinking about it, that's probably pretty important, especially for solo play. There is also a black market that can come out in the game, and here it is. It moves around the board once it comes out. It doesn't start the game out, and it will offer other things for sale. They're more expensive and they're more powerful, as you might expect things on a black market to be. Well, what else is on the map? The other thing that is on the map are ruins, and if you get to them, you can do some exploration, and you're rolling a d10 and perhaps having no luck, but perhaps finding something that will help you or something that will hurt you. So there is, once you find these ruins and get to these ruins, you have the option of doing that. There are also shrines that you can get to, which offer potential healing situations with rations and things like that. You need to find these, and you can also possibly get blessings there. So I'm glossing over this a little bit because I realize I'm throwing a lot at you just to try to explain the game, and I haven't even gone through the basic sequence of play, which I'm going to discuss and then demonstrate. The sequence of play is fairly simple. In fact, you have your party. You cannot split up in this game, and that's something I'm going to talk about in my comments. You cannot split up whether you're playing one player, or I think it says the game plays up to 7. That would be a really long game, but your party is represented by this guy right here, and you have a baseline movement of 4, and unless you are moving along a road or a river for the entirety of your movement, so it's a little hard to see, but here's a river and here's a road. If you are moving along the road or river for the entirety of your turn, that counts as cautious movement, and you can simply move to where you're wanting to go, and that's it. If you are doing anything other than that, it is normal movement or perhaps reckless movement. What you need to do is to incorporate that navigation roll into your skill check. Skill check is the second part of the turn. Every time you have a game turn as the second part of your sequence of play, you are going to be rolling this explore die and this survival die to see whether you have found any gold or whether you have consumed any food. Additionally, unless you have used cautious movement, you will also be rolling this navigate die to see whether or not you have gotten lost. So you roll all 3 of these skill die and see what you get. And reference, well, that was actually not so bad. So if I made that roll, for example, for Impy, my leprechaun here, I'm going to be referencing the relevant skill stats here to see whether I have rolled at or below that number. So in this particular case, what did I do? Well, I definitely rolled at my navigate number, which means I did not go off course. That's a good thing. I'll tell you what happens if that wasn't successful. I rolled below my explore die, which means I was successful in finding some gold. So I find 2 gold here. However, I did not roll below my survival number. So we are going to consume our food value, our food rating, which in this case for the leprechaun is just a 1. So I would need to lower the food value that I'm carrying here. I have currently 3 food down to 2. That's getting pretty low, and that's something I would need to be aware of in terms of trying to bolster back up. Had we rolled, say, a 5 on this navigate die, it means we would have gone wandering. When you go wandering, you need to roll a d6 to see where you have gone off course, and there is a chart that's reproduced here and other places to determine where you ended up in the hex as opposed to where you wanted to go. So if I rolled, for example, this value of the hex here on my exploration, what would happen is if I had intended to land here, instead I would land here. Doesn't seem so bad, but if you're trying, say, for example, desperately to get to a city to turn in a quest before something bad happens and you thought you were there and you ended up here, you have to expend another turn to get back where you wanted to go. The third part of a turn is to roll for the circumstances. There are various circumstances you can have to deal with during the course of the game. They can be environmental in nature, basically. Some of them can be benefits, and here's an example of 5. You have 5 laid out at any time, and if you roll a hex on your d6, you choose one from the pile. I'm not sure why they didn't just have you have 6 out, but I guess it was to mimic the 5 quests that are out also. I don't really understand that, but in any case, here's an example of some of the types of circumstances you could deal with. So there could be some nature effects, and these are unavoidable, which means that you cannot, there are various ways of avoiding some of these circumstances, and this is not able to be avoided. So for example, if you do cautious movement that we just talked about in the first part of your turn, you can choose to avoid a circumstance that you pull. So if you rolled, for example, these mangy wolves and didn't want to deal with them and had done cautious movement, you wouldn't have to. However, nature circumstances are not unavoidable. So here is a flash flood. All heroes must roll a survival check. That is your blue die. If you find yourselves within 1 hex of a river or open water, this roll is made with a +1 modifier. If you fail, this is what you suffer. So everybody has to deal with that environment. If you pull in something like a mangy wolves, you would need to have this combat encounter, and we're going to look at combat encounters shortly, and in fact maybe I'll use these as an example. Here is an affliction that may occur. You have to, in this case, you are sickened, and ultimately you have to have your ability quantity for everybody, and this affliction is going to remain for 4 game turns. A lot of ongoing effects involve 4 game turns for some reason, and unfortunately the game does not come with, although there's a ton of stuff in the game, it doesn't come with markers that allow you to easily track that. So I was using these additional d6s that I had, but that was a little surprising that it didn't come with markers, because this comes up a lot in the game, an ongoing effect for a certain number of turns. You could have a discovery. In this case, you discover a cave system, and if that is the case, you get to put a marker on the board as to where it is, and you can enter it at any time. So that's nice. You don't have to enter it right then. And it tells you if you do enter it and travel through it, you must deal with all the circumstances that you find, and you'll also get additional benefits for encounters that you may do there. And here you could have potentially discovered a treasure. This is a dungeoneering manual. This dusty old tome is filled with tips and tricks to help you survive. You can use the tome to gain a bonus to your skills during an event phase that it does not happen in combat. So this is a sampling of the kinds of circumstances that you may encounter in part 3 of the turn. The next part of the turn is the event phase, and in the event phase, if you have ended your movement in a city or a shrine or with a boss or in a ruin or on a quest location, you can do various things. So for example, we'll just turn to this card to explain. I talked about being in a city where you can buy things, you can turn in your quests, and you can also heal. If we end on a shrine, we can do some things here, also spend some money there, get a blessing, turn in a quest and heal. If we end on a boss area, and that is something represented here, for example, if we end on a boss area, we are going to have to fight that boss. If we end on the ruins, I think I showed you the options for ruins. We can basically roll to see what happens. We get perhaps a benefit, perhaps not a benefit. Or if we are on a quest area, and these are the dynamic areas that are represented by these quest tokens that come out based on the quests that you have in your quest row, we can attempt to complete their quest. Or if we're just sort of standing around, in none of these cases, we just skip over this phase entirely. And then point 5 in the sequence of play is to roll to see if the dead king comes out, or if the dead king is already out, we move him around. And I talked about this earlier. Here is the dead king token, and he will come out on a roll, a d6 roll. For the first time you roll, he'll come out on a 6 only. Then he'll come out on a 5 or a 6, a 3, a 4, 5, or 6, etc. If he is out, he immediately, you roll to see what city he shows up in. That is a d6 roll. So if you rolled a 2 on the d6, he would appear in this number 2 city, and he would immediately crush that city, and it would become a fallen city that you could no longer travel to. And yes, there are ways of reviving fallen cities, but I'm going to skip over that now. Nevertheless, everywhere the dead king appears, he goes and crushes a city and travels around the board trying to do that. And once all the cities are gone, if you haven't revived any of them, he's going to come after you. And this is sort of the end game of the game. Once he is out on the board, you need to definitely try to avoid him for as long as possible, because you will not be in any way strong enough to fight him for a long time, as I showed you on his card. And that's the basic sequence of play, and you sort of rinse and keep repeating that. I wanted to show you some of the art in the game. These are the back of some of the roll cards, and unfortunately you never really get to see this in the game, because this is the front of the roll card and then the art is on the back, and it's an odd design choice, I think. There are a few odd design choices in this game, I think. This being one of them, that the art that is here is largely not visible at all, and you sort of forget about it. And I think it is, it's helpful to have it here. I'll just show you a little bit more of it. The other thing that is another design choice that was curious to me is the fact that the city icons here for the beginning cities, for example, that's City 2. City 2 is always here, so it could be named, if I'm thinking of, say, for example, Runebound or something like that, where there could be a nice piece of art depicting this city rather than this type of icon. What changes is where that is, because it is a modular board, but that is always going to be City 2 there, so I don't know why that was done in that way. Some more. These are, again, the back of, this one's pretty cool, the back of the roll cards. And here is the priest. We'll show this fellow here. Before we look at combat in action, let's look at the encounter card to see what's on it. This value, which goes, I think it goes up to 5, is this sort of level of the encounter that you have. This is the name of it, and this is its type. We mentioned earlier that our favorite type is the magical nature type, so we're not favored creatures, but you could have things like, for example, undead. There are humanoids, for example, these raiders, which we'll take a look at also. Everybody's got a health and an energy level, as you do, and then there is a basic D6 chart on the card indicating what action they may take. You will be rolling for this at the during combat. And then the listing of what the reward is for fighting this encounter. And you can see, for example, if we compare this level 2 card as against these Bone Legions, which is up to a level 5, how they have additional health and energy, and also if we got into it, the values for the damage done would be greater. So they are doing up to 6 damage here with a certain type of attack that also has a special ability of Cursed, which adds an effect of us being able to unable to heal our damage, and we need to, or the opponent would need to, do some die rolling during the beginning phase of each combat round to try to break the curse if they could. So obviously the higher levels are more difficult to defeat. In this example, we're going to be fighting this level 2 wolves, and I will show you how it goes. So this is the battle mat that I showed you earlier, and there is room on it for keeping track of all sorts of things, but the main area here is you're meant to keep track of the health and energy level of your opponent. So we would start by writing in their starting health is going to be 8, and their energy level is going to be 8 as well. And as a reminder, the actions that have this gray hex in them, in this case it's just this one, require that amount of energy to do. So we would be, if we were reducing their energy down to 0, they wouldn't be dying, but they would be unable to do that action, and the health is what we need to chop away at to actually kill them. On our end, combat begins by we first declare what we are going to do, and we look to our own roll sheet to see what our potential actions are, and we already went through this, but in this case we are a trap specialist, and our biggest single action, which at this level would cause potentially 8 damage, is to set a trap, basically. And in order to do this, we have to use one of our energy. Now, our energy is only at 3, but I think in this instance I'm going to come out with this because if we can land this, which we would kill them because we would take up all 8 of their health. So we would just overpower them. So the issue would become what they would do to us. So we would say that we are going to do this as the first phase of combat, and then the second phase of combat is to figure out what they are going to do to us, because then combat becomes resolved simultaneously. So to do that, you roll your d6, and in this case we rolled a 4, and you match up where it is, and they are going to encircle us. And if we were fighting as a group here, we would all have to take the loss of 2 health on this attack. They are going to be using 1 energy to do it, so they are down to 7, and they are going to be inflicting 2 wounds on us. We have lost 2 health, so we're going down to 4, and they, however, have lost their 8 health because they fell into our trap. However, you notice that in this option, there's something that says defend 2. What this means is that when they encircle us and when they are doing this attack, they can also absorb 2 of our hits. So in this case, we actually just brought them to 2 health because our 8 attack was absorbed. 2 of them were absorbed. So they're down to 2 health, and we are down to 2 energy and 4 health ourselves. You can see up here in the corner. So I think for the next, and we'll go on to the next round. For the next round, I'm going to do a straight offensive attack. This is a triggered assault here, and I can do 4 damage potentially with that. So that is what I'm going to do for the second round, and we're going to again roll the d6 and see what they decide to do for the next round. And they're back to their 4, which is, again, they're still encircling us. So they are going to inflict 2 more wounds on us. We are down now to 2 health. And we are going to inflict our 4 on them, minus the 2 that they can defend. That's going to be landing 2 damage, but they only have 2 health, so at this point now, they are down to 0. And that concludes the combat for us with these wolves, and we would then take our reward, which is here in the upper corner. 4 gold and 1 food. So what we need to do then is just clean up where we are. We stand here at 2 health and 2 energy. So we're at 2 health, we're at 2 energy, and we got 1 more food. No, did we get 2 food or 1 food? 1 food. So we got 1 more food. That seemed to go pretty well, and that was an opponent we could fairly easily handle. Let's just take a look as an example. We're back to our original stats, a health of 6 and an energy of 3, just to give you an example of what this level 4 opponent would look like in battle, because it would be a bit of a different story. They have a health of 16 starting and an energy level of 14. What we would need to do going into this I'm sure, is to consume one of our handy elixirs. The handy elixir is something that we picked up on the market somewhere along the way, and we can either regain 3 health and energy for 3 combat rounds, or we could heal 6 health and energy outside of combat. Now, if we consume it right before combat, I guess I would say that that is outside of combat. So I'm going to do that, but our maximum, I don't know if our maximum health, if we can just go to 8, I think we can actually go just to 8. So what I'm going to do is we're going to consume one of these elixirs, and so that's going to bring us down to 1 on that, bring us up to our maximum health of 8, and we're going to then go to 6 energy. We have 1 left, and we also have a couple of potions. So one of these basic potions will allow us to heal 3 health and energy, but I don't know that we can. Yes, we can use this potion if we choose our defensive action. So we can still have that in our backpack. We're going to end up having to do this, I'm pretty sure, because of our starting levels. In any case, so that's the first thing that I'm doing before combat starts. And now in combat, what I'm going to do is I'm still going to start with my specialty trap, because that's going to deal the most potential damage. So that is potentially a damage of 8 dealt. And we will roll this d6 to see. Whoa, that rolled way off of the mat. That came in at a 5. Not great. Single target health. If this damage is reduced, another target suffers this attack. Well, it isn't going to be reduced. We are going to take 6 damage right away, and that's going to bring us down to 2. So it's a good thing that we did what we did, and it's going to bring them down to 8. They did not expend any health to do that attack. Before the next round goes, I know that I'm going to need to use one of these potions, or I should say in the round. I'm going to choose my defense, which is here, and this is going to allow me to absorb 4 incoming damage, and I'm also going to consume this potion, so I will regain 3 health and 3 energy for that. So I'm going to go back up to 5 health, and again, I think the 3 energy may be wasted. I'm going to go up to 7 energy, because I'm pretty sure that's my maximum energy, and I'm sure somebody will correct me if I'm wrong about that, and go down to 2 potions. So I'm defending against 4 incoming damage, and let's see what those raiders are going to do now. They are going to use one of their energy attacks, so we need to mark that. They're down to 13 energy, and we are blinded in this attack. It's an attack of 5. We're going to be absorbing 4 of that, so our health is going to go back down to 4, and we are blinded. This blinded condition means that at the beginning of every new round of combat, we will need to roll our navigate die and succeed on it. If we don't succeed on it, our attacks are going to be halved, or the values of our attacks are going to be halved. And our navigate value here is only at a 3, so it's going to be pretty tough to roll a 1, 2, or a 3 on a d10 not to have that effect, but that's the situation. So it is now the next round of combat, so we're going to take this navigate die and hope that we can roll a 1, 2, or 3, or else we're going to be blinded, and we did not. We rolled a 4. Close, but not close enough. So now everything we do is going to be cut in half. My plan had been to do this triggered assault for an 8 attack, but I'm still going to do it. It's only going to be worth 4 potentially, but I need to try here. So I'm going to potentially be doing 4 damage here on that, and let's see what they do. Well, they rolled another hex. Not good for us, because we are dead now. We acted incautiously, and our health was only at a 4. I didn't raise it back up, and they are doing a 6 damage. I don't think there's anything we can do at this point to defend against it. Let me just confirm that in my what I've got here. The luck stone can only be used outside of combat. That does give you a reroll, but it's not within combat, so that's not going to help me. The potions won't help me. Rations certainly aren't going to help me. Climbing gear and that elixir, I have to use that with a defensive action, which I did not take. So I think we just saw me die. And there are some things that can happen to mitigate that, but in this case, this was just an example. So I acted, too rashly and took a risk and died. And in fact, had I looked more closely at this card, I would have seen that with only 4 health that I hadn't buffered up, 2 of the 3 options of the attacks would have killed me. And had I really been looking closer, I would have done something different. So that's an example of a combat with a level 4 encounter and just 1 person. And you can really see why this game can get out of hand pretty quickly, because we haven't even looked at what a boss card would offer in terms of combat actions. And I'll just pull in one. We'll look here at the gray slime briefly. This is only a level 2 boss, but you can see right away 36 health, 25 energy, and the options here, they have 6 options, just like the other encounters do. They are 6 different ones in this particular case, and the effects of them are very thematic. They offer, for example, piercing damage which cannot be defended against. There are things here where you can become diseased and fatigued, and these are further effects that happen to you. There's a trapping effect. All of these things are detailed in the manual as conditions, and I'll just show you them here a little bit. This to me works extremely well in the game because they, as I mentioned, are extremely thematic. So for example, what does trapped mean? If you became trapped, you have to succeed on an explore roll during the declaration phase, which is the beginning of combat, in order to act normally, and if you fail, you can only defend. Well, that makes sense. If you're trapped, if you fail to get out of that trapped condition, you can only defend. And there are these 2 pages of conditions that come in with the monsters that you fight that works really well. It's an incredibly ambitious task to try to do what the designers of this game have tried to do, and when I first opened up the rulebook and started reading it, as I do in terms, the way that I learn best is to just follow step by step what I am instructed to do. And when I got to this here, select your race, favorite opponent. You excel against this foe. When facing it, you deal extra health or energy damage to your opponent. See page 43 for detail. Well, you can probably guess what's going to happen here. When I go to page 43, that is definitely not the page that details that. And I just sort of had a sinking feeling when that happened so early on in this rule book. Maybe this has been fixed by now. I don't know. There are quite a few errors of this nature in the rule book, and it's just really frustrating. And part of the reason this happens is that late in page proofs, things are getting moved around and nobody is doing the cross-checking. And when things get moved around late in page proofs, it's because there is a presentation or conceptual issue, I think, in terms of how something is going to be presented or in what order. And the game does suffer, I think, a little bit from that. In terms of the gameplay itself, here we have a look at the back of the box. Now, here, okay, it's quite clearly, can you save the valley from the dead king? Yes, that obviously is the goal of the game, although, again, didn't see that quite explicitly mentioned in the rulebook. The over 700 hero combinations in the box is awesome, and I think that is both the biggest strength and the biggest weakness. And I say it's a weakness because I do feel that, at least for solo play, and predominantly, obviously, that's what I'm talking about here for my channel, there is an issue of playability in the game. It's just not possible, I don't think, to be able to face down that Dead King in any reasonable fashion with many of the character combinations. I think if you studied the game and chose a couple of combinations, as I talked about, that would allow you to have the biggest modifications to what's coming at you, it may be possible. But that's not over 700 choices. I just don't believe there are over 700 choices in the game to play solo. Now, the rule book does say, and I recommend doing this, there are some modifications for solo play, such as giving yourself in combat a basically more than one action to do. One of them is done at half strength. I think that's absolutely essential to have any kind of hope. The other thing is you may just wish to create some house rules. I think what I settled on was honestly just trying to progress through the bosses somehow in numbered fashion, and say for an easy game, play against and successfully defeat 3 bosses, and for a medium game, 5 bosses, and for a really super hard game, 8, and for an epic game, the full set of values here, including the Dead King. I think it would take me many, many more plays than, frankly, I'm going to do to see what the right character combination is, what the right number of starting items are, and what the combination of sort of power-ups or boosts that you should give yourself at the beginning with your gold to make it possible. The other thing I think you could do is just simply start with higher values on your skills and abilities. In particular, I think food and that rationing system whereby you can just through luck alone really end up out of food, and then that's it, and you're done. And that kind of thing in a game, I feel, is a little problematic. If you watch my channel enough, you know I really don't care at all about winning or losing a game. It's almost the last thing on my mind. But if the game crashes and burns because of simply bad die rolling, especially when there are so many components and possibilities out there for you, but you can't even get to them, that does start to feel frustrating. And I played a game here, for example, where I was just carrying around a couple of completed quests and couldn't really get to a city to turn them in before the city fell because the Dead King came out so soon, and that was just frustrating, especially when, as I said, you're looking at a game with so many different components and options. And we'll just look here at the back of the box to show a little bit what I mean, what is in the box content, and all of this is necessary to make this run, to make this type of game and RPG experience in a box work. But that's not going to help you if there's a timing mechanism that in essence sort of fails you. If you happen to roll a 6 the first time the Dead King is potentially coming out, or a 5 or a 6 the second time, it's just too fast an ending against too majestic a foe. And then there's the dry erase and the necessary fact of having something that is fluid, but in this case the mechanism for that is this dry erase. And I just want to show you, here's the other thing about the art, and of course perhaps one of the reasons they didn't really show it. This is my character of the trap specialist, but I've got the trap specialist as a leprechaun, and that's certainly not a leprechaun. So maybe that's part of the reason art wasn't shown on the front. I don't know. But with this art, I just think that think it could be made better use of, because you would never really see it. In any event, it took me a while to feel comfortable writing on something like this. I don't actually still feel comfortable writing on it, but it is necessary because you are managing all these things. They are changing values, and that is absolutely a strength of the game. You feel like you're running out of food. You feel like, oh wow, I've got a lot of gold. That's another reason to get to a city. I need to buy things. I'm low on rations. I get a bonus to my stats, and look how my mastery is changing, and I should try to use that, but I'm low on energy and it costs energy to use that. It's really fantastic. It's ambitious and it's successful, I think. The downside is, again, the mechanics of doing this with cardboard are such that you are constantly, you're writing stuff down, you're erasing it, you end up leaving the tip off the pen most of the time, or at least I do, and then I'm worried, well, is it going to dry out? I don't have a lot of experience with dry erase technology, such as it is, so maybe maybe the pens are made so they don't dry out. I don't know. You get a lot of pens in the box, certainly, and I know these are easy to purchase, obviously, otherwise, if yours all did dry out, and it erases pretty well. I wrote on a couple of cards and left them out for a few days untouched and erased them, and they erased up pretty nicely. So at least for my little experiment there, that seemed to work. But this is a thing. I mean, it's undoubtedly something in the game that will concern people, and I think that's a legitimate concern. On the battle mat, which I showed you, here is the blank battle mat. Ultimately, when I was playing off camera, I did not use this. I simply recorded the values. First of all, I didn't really need to keep track of group purchases because I was just playing one character, so everything I had was part of the group. And also, I just found it easier to keep track of this in a notebook rather than doing this erasure. It didn't really work for me. I didn't talk about this at all because I didn't use it at all, but this is a way, as if you needed it, of increasing the game difficulty, either voluntarily or there are certain in-game effects that will say you are encountering, say, for example, a difficult monster, in which case you need to add plus 25 to his vitals and plus 3 to the damage that is dealt. If you are doing that, there's a way on this battle map to keep track of it while you're fighting, so to remind yourself of that, because that might only be in effect for that one particular battle. And it also tells you get some additional gold, so if you decide, oh, hey, I'm a pretty beefed up character and I'm pulled an encounter that already is relatively low level, let me increase the difficulty. Let me say it's moderate, so I'm going to add this to the vital stats of the creature, and then I will get this additional reward after that. So that's the battle mat. As I said, I found for the way that I was playing the game, ultimately, though I showed it to you just because it's important, I did not use that. It seems like so many board games these days, adventure games, fantasy games, are proclaiming themselves to be an RPG in a box or have that as a goal in some way. I can't say that this game proclaims itself to be. I don't know what the marketing of it has been, but it certainly is attempting to capture the dynamic experience of playing a character with stats and abilities that change over the course of the game, that change in response to the game. And it is, as I said, very successful in doing that. I think of the games I've played recently that have this element of attempting to tell a story and attempting to make you feel as if you are a changing character within the story. And I think here of something like Dungeon Degenerates or of Dreams and Shadows. Those come to mind immediately. This is quite successful at doing that. The functionality, though, the mechanics of doing that involve this dry erase, and that is just by necessity the interaction of a static physical element of any type of board game with the mechanics, or the attempt to have the mechanics play out as if they are an actual RPG, which of course, bottom line, whether you have the additional elements of tokens or whatever, ultimately is something that exists as a purely spoken narrative in terms of conveying those stats. You have to manage that, and that is definitely a part of this game. I think the one thing that is missing here that something like Dungeon Degenerates does more effectively is create a larger story. I think here the individual quests and circumstances feel not knitted together. They feel more like little one-offs. They can be involving for what they are, but the overall story really just has to do with this, is pretty basic with the Dead King, and it follows the traditional narrative of just fighting, ultimately trying to fight the biggest boss. And he is trying to overtake the lands, and the cities will fall to him, which has the effect of narrowing your choices for healing and purchasing power-ups or purchasing additional skills and items and things. But beyond that, there isn't a bigger story, whereas in something that is a little more pre-programmed, like Dungeon Degenerates or Of Dreams and Shadows, which has more branching stories but provides actual more text for you to read and follow, those offer, I think, more of a meta narrative. But the advantage here is that you are not forced into any particular path in that regard. There are lots of choices in this game, and at an individual case-by-case basis, you do feel, or I did feel, as if I had options, and they were, each option had its pluses and minuses. And at the core, that's what I'm looking for in a game, is choice and option, and a little bit of pain associated with whatever choice or option I take, because I know that there's going to be a potential benefit, but then there's going to be a sacrifice as well. And this does that, I think, extremely well at the macro level as well as at the micro level. So when you have an encounter, how you deal with that encounter, if it is combat, or if, choosing or not to, say, use a luck stone to get rid of a circumstance. Should I do that now? Should I wait? Can I deal with this circumstance? Am I close enough to a city? Let me try to get there and do some elevation to my stats and to my items carried, and then come back and deal with this. Things of that nature, I think, feel very open-ended, and that is throughout the game and one of its greatest strengths as well.